It started right on the courthouse steps. Officer Ryan Hale dragged a well-dressed black woman through the rain shouting orders as cameras rolled. He thought she was trespassing, but minutes later the truth about who she really was would turn his entire world upside down. How could one mistake inside the walls of justice expose everything wrong with the system itself? If this moment already has you thinking, give this story a like and share it with someone who believes in justice. Now let's step into what really happened that morning. I was there that morning right on the front steps of the county courthouse when the sky hadn't decided whether to rain again or clear up for good. The stone was still slick and you could smell wet newspaper and coffee. A TV crew was staking out a spot for some big case scheduled later, their boom mic bobbing like a fishing pole in a gray sea of umbrellas. The loudspeakers crackled with routine announcements, security reminders, docket changes, nothing dramatic. Nothing that warned us we were about to watch the floor drop out from under our idea of order. She approached from the sidewalk like plenty of professionals do every morning, a black woman, early 40s if I had to guess, neat black suit hair, pulled back leather briefcase tucked into her side, like she meant to get to her day and get through it. Nothing about her was loud, no rushing, no fumbling, no fuss. Just a calm stride, a small nod to the lobby guard, and a gentle good morning officer as she reached the security lane reserved for staff. Officer Ryan Hale was on post, tall, square-shouldered jaw set like he'd slept with his badge on. He watched her approach, eyes scanning from heels to briefcase, to face, then back down again, as if he were reading a barcode that wouldn't scan. He didn't return the greeting. He just lifted his chin and said flat as a cold pan, "This entrance isn't for visitors." She stopped without taking offense. Whatever pressure rose inside her didn't show. "I'm not a visitor," she said evenly. "I work here." A flicker crossed Hale's face like a muscle in his cheek didn't get the memo to stay still. He stepped half a pace toward the glass gate. "Step back, ma'am. Restricted area." Now I've seen people argue with security before finger pointing, voice raising, the kind of thing that attracts the wrong kind of attention. This wasn't that. She didn't bluster. She didn't plead. She tried to clarify one more time, softer than most. "Officer, I have business inside." "I'm due." He cut her off with a quick hand signal, not to her, but toward the hallway. A second officer, Collins, peeled off a conversation with the lobby clerk and came over. The energy shifted. The TV crew looked up. One reporter tilted her camera just enough to catch the angle of the woman's shoulder as Collins took position on her left side. Hale stood on her right, close enough to feel like a wall. "Please," the woman said the word almost a breath. "I have the right to be here." Hale's voice sharpened the way voices do when they decide they're done being reasonable. "You people always think the rules don't apply to you." The lobby exhaled at once, one of those collective, barely audible gasps that has no words in it, just shame. The reporter's eyes flashed at her cameraman. The lens rose another inch. A clerk behind the magnetometer turned her body sideways as if hiding could make it less real. "Ma'am, step back now," Collins said, and it came out as instruction more than threat. But hands are a kind of language too. He touched her forearm to guide her away the way you might redirect someone who's about to walk into traffic. Hale mirrored the motion on the other side, and suddenly the space around her felt like a funnel, too narrow, too tight, too decided. She didn't yank away. She didn't stiffen into a fight. There's a kind of strength that looks like stillness, and she had it. She only turned her head enough to meet Hale's eyes, steady, not hard, and said, "I work here." "Not through this entrance," he answered, and the words landed like a lock clicking shut. They pivoted her gently, at first police choreography, away from the staff gate and toward the public line. Her heels lost grip on the damp stone for a second, a small skid, the briefcase sliding against her hip. "Please," she started again, but Hale's hand firmed on her elbow, and Collins slipped lower toward her wrist, and the choreography stopped being a dance and started being a decision. What happened next wasn't a slam or a tackle. It was the simplest kind of indignity, the kind that pretends it isn't indignity at all. Collins' shoulder brushed her center of balance as Hale guided her back. The slick step did the rest. She went down hard enough for the sound to carry leather meeting stone paper, whispering loose as the briefcase sprang open. A stack of documents fanned across the wet tread, the ink on one page feathering at the corner. Someone near me said, "Hey, take it easy," the words small and useless. Another voice from the public line, "I'm recording this." Then a third, "Don't move, ma'am. I've got your papers," followed by the soft scuttle of shoes, trying to help and not get in the way. Hale didn't shout. He didn't have to. The posture did the shouting, the set shoulders, the angled chin, the stance of a man who believes the rule book only ever opens one way. He hovered, not offering a hand, while Collins stepped back half a step, palms out, like he meant to show there was no harm in any of it. She pressed her palm to the stone and lifted herself to one knee, gathering air like it took effort to carry it. There was a smear of rainwater on her sleeve, a clean diagonal line where it had cut through a faint dust of grit. She looked at the briefcase, mud-splotched now, then up at Hale. Her voice found steel without raising a note. "You'll regret this," she said, "not because of who I am, but because of what you've become. If a sentence can silence a room, that one did." It didn't roar. It resonated. I felt it in the quiet beneath the lobby, buzz in the way the reporter's hands steadied on the camera, in the way Collins' eyes flicked to the floor. Hale's mouth tensed at the corner. For a heartbeat, I thought I saw doubt, like some private jury inside him had asked for a recess. But the uniform is a costume that doesn't like second thoughts. He looked past her toward the public line and said into the air, "Please proceed through the main entrance. Staff must use proper credentials." The woman gathered the nearest papers with deliberate care, the way you collect something you refuse to let anyone else define. A man in a windbreaker crouched to hand her a damp folder. She thanked him with a small nod, no wobble in it. She stood slow, not shaky, and closed the briefcase, the click sounding louder than it should have. "Ma'am," Collins said softer now, as if the word could return what the moment had taken. She didn't answer him. She stepped back from the staff gate, set the briefcase square at her side, and for a second simply looked at the doors. Those glass mouths to a building that's supposed to swallow chaos and return order. The loudspeaker crackled again with a bland schedule update. Someone coughed. Somewhere a phone chimed with the polite ding of a new message. Then the small storm hit screens, rising like Shield's lenses, peeking over shoulders, whispers knitting themselves into narrative. "Did you get that? I got it. Keep filming. That's going online right now." The reporter spoke low into her mic, the kind of whisper that travels live at the courthouse, where a confrontation is unfolding at the staff entrance. I remember the last image before the crowd shifted and swallowed the scene, the briefcase against the step, a brown bruise of mud on its corner, like a mark that wouldn't come out. It's funny what your mind decides to keep, not the faces, not the exact sequence of hands and elbows and orders, but that square of leather stained and shut like a verdict without a voice. People always ask later what I thought than what I knew. The truth is, I knew the feeling more than the facts. I knew what it's like when something small reveals something big. I knew we had all just watched a line crossed by people who believed they were drawing it, and I knew, without knowing how, that the morning had split into before and after, and we were standing with our shoes on the seam. Behind me, somebody whispered, "Who is she?" It wasn't the question of a gossip. It was the question you ask when you realize you might be the last to understand a truth that was standing in front of you the whole time. The Internal Affairs office smelled like burnt coffee and paper, a place where no one ever raised their voice, but everyone listened too closely. Officer Ryan Hale sat across from his lawyer, Mark Holloway, the blinds half drawn against a flood of afternoon light that didn't belong in a room built for excuses. "It was routine," Ryan said, his tone clipped. "She was trespassing. I followed procedure." Mark's pen stopped tapping. "Routine," he repeated quietly. "Ryan, that video is everywhere. You're trending on 3 platforms. Cops drag black woman from courthouse. It's not a good look for the department or for you." Ryan's jaw tightened. He didn't like the word trending. It made what happened sound like entertainment. He reached for the laptop, replaying the viral clip again. The woman's face flashed on a screen, calm, composed, too dignified for the way he'd grabbed her arm. He saw himself barking orders, the angle from a dozen phones catching his hand as it shoved the briefcase aside. He slammed the lid shut. "People don't understand the job," he muttered. "They don't see the threats we deal with. We're trained to react fast." Mark leaned back in his chair, studying him. "She didn't look like a threat, Ryan. She looked like someone trying to go to work." Ryan didn't answer. He'd heard that tone before, from reporters, from his ex-wife, from anyone who'd never worn the badge. It wasn't judgment, it was disbelief. And disbelief to him always came from people who'd never stood between order and chaos. Mark's voice softened. "This isn't the first time, is it? You've been written up before." Ryan's eyes flickered. He remembered. 3 years ago, a complaint that said he'd been too soft during a protest. The subject had been a young black man who threw a bottle near the courthouse gate. The department had quietly reprimanded him, and the local union rep told him afterward, "You can't hesitate out there, not anymore." That sentence had followed him like a second badge. Don't hesitate, don't blink, don't look weak. Now, sitting in this sterile room, he heard that voice again inside his head. Keep order no matter what. He took a breath. "Mark, I did what I was supposed to." That entrance was restricted. She refused to comply. "And when she said she worked there?" Mark asked. Ryan stared at the floor. She didn't look like someone who did. The words hung between them, quiet, ugly, unfixable. That night, Ryan sat alone in his living room, the TV muttering through half a news segment about growing calls for accountability. His daughter's photo sat on the mantel, 10 years old, bright-eyed, wearing his academy cap that drooped over her ears. Her smile made his throat tighten. He whispered to the photo like it could defend him. "I kept order. I did what was right." But the room didn't believe him. The soft glow of his phone lit up again. Notification after notification. Comments stacked under the headline, "Officer Dragged Woman Who Turned Out to Be Staff Attorney." They still didn't know she was a judge yet. Some of the comments read like bullets. "Fire him. This is why people don't trust cops." She didn't resist, and he still grabbed her. Others defended him. "She should have shown ID. He's doing his job. Everyone's playing the race card again." Ryan scrolled through both sides until the words blurred. He stopped on one comment that hit harder than the rest. He didn't see a woman. He saw a problem. His thumb hovered over the screen, then went still. The room was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the low tick of the wall clock, a sound he'd never noticed until now. By morning, the department had issued a temporary suspension pending review. Reporters swarmed the precinct gates, shouting his name like it belonged to a headline, now not a person. "Officer Hale, do you regret your actions? Did you know she was a judge? Was race a factor, sir?" He said nothing, just walked faster. Cameras snapped. Inside, Captain Doyle met him in the hallway. "Keep your head down, Ryan. This'll blow over once she cools off." Ryan asked. "You've spoken to her?" Doyle shrugged. "Not directly. Legal's handling it. Just lay low, all right, lay low." Another order disguised as advice. Ryan went home again that evening. Same routine, same chair, same silence. He poured whiskey into his coffee mug and opened the video once more, telling himself he'd find proof he hadn't crossed the line. But every time he hit play, his voice sounded harsher. The shove looked rougher. The woman's calm looked more like strength than defiance. When he finally paused the frame right where she said, "You'll regret this. Not because of who I am, but because of what you've become." He stared at her, eyes frozen on screen. Something in him flinched. He muttered, "They don't know the truth." But deep down, he wondered if he did either. Outside, the night hum of the city carried distant sirens. Someone else's emergency, someone else's story. For the first time in years, Ryan didn't feel like the man in control of it. He sat there in the dim room, badge glinting faintly on the table beside him, and felt the weight of every decision he'd ever justified in the name of order. People online kept shouting about justice, but justice, he realized, was the one thing that never answered back when you called its name. And somewhere across town, in a quiet apartment lined with law books and framed certificates, a woman with bruises on her wrist was preparing her own version of the truth. The kind that doesn't need to shout to be heard. The morning after the footage broke nationwide, the Internal Affairs office was quieter than usual. Paperwork hummed through the printer, coffee sat untouched, and no one wanted to be the first to mention the video everyone had already watched. At the far end of the corridor, Alyssa Grant sat at her desk, replaying the same 30-second clip for the 5th time. She leaned forward, elbows on the table, the glow of the screen catching the silver edge of her badge. In the video, 2 officers dragged a woman across the courthouse steps. The crowd murmured, someone yelled, "Stop!" And then that one frame froze her breath every time the woman lifting her chin after falling. No anger, no tears. Just that calm, heavy silence that carried more weight than shouting ever could. Alyssa paused the clip and studied that face. There was something behind the quiet discipline, not fear. Experience, not submission. She'd prosecuted enough assault cases to recognize the difference between humiliation and restraint. This woman wasn't broken, she was calculating. She pressed pause, leaned back and murmured, "Who are you? The name listed on the preliminary report," said Naomi Ellis. No occupation, no statement, no follow-up. Just a note declined medical attention. That was odd. Most victims wanted a record. Most needed it. This one disappeared before the ambulance even arrived. An hour later, Alyssa walked down to the courthouse administration wing. The hall smelled of floor polish and old paper, that particular scent of bureaucracy that clings to justice like a shadow. Behind the frosted glass door marked Human Resources, a clerk in a navy cardigan looked up as Alyssa flashed her credentials. "I'm looking into the incident at the south entrance yesterday," Alyssa said. "Do you have any record of an employee or staff member named Naomi Ellis?" The clerk typed slowly, squinting at the screen. Then her eyebrows lifted. "Ellis. Naomi." She turned the monitor slightly, her tone shifting. "We have a new appointment, Judge Naomi Ellis. Just started last week." For a moment, the hum of the office faded into silence. Alyssa blinked. Judge the clerk nodded matter of fact, as if she hadn't just dropped a match into gasoline. "Criminal Division C, sworn in Friday. Reported early this week for case reviews." Alyssa's heart thudded once, sharp and deliberate. She glanced at the date of the appointment. It lined up exactly with the morning of the altercation. She stepped back from the desk, whispering almost to herself, "Oh my God." The scene cut in her mind at least to that video frame again. The woman's expression after falling, that silence, that looked too deliberate to be weakness. It wasn't just self-control, it was authority. Back in her office, Alyssa opened the personnel file, and the photo loaded there. She was Naomi Ellis. Black robe folded neatly across her arm, the same calm eyes looking directly at the camera. Beneath it, former prosecutor, Federal Ethics Division. Alyssa exhaled slowly. The entire department had just dragged a federal prosecutor turned judge across courthouse concrete. Across town, inside a small apartment lined with old books and quiet light, Judge Naomi Ellis was making tea. Her wrist bore a faint bruise, a purplish echo of what happened. The kettle whistled softly, a sound too gentle for the thoughts running through her mind. On the kitchen shelf sat a framed photo of her father, Judge Harold Ellis, one of the first black circuit judges in the state, who'd once been spat on outside his own courtroom in 1974. She looked at his young face, frozen in black and white, the same stillness she'd worn yesterday. "You told me never to shout, Dad," she murmured. "Just to stand taller." The steam rose around her like fog. Outside sirens moaned somewhere far away, reminders that the world hadn't changed as much as everyone liked to believe. By noon, Alyssa stood in Naomi's doorway. The judge's apartment smelled faintly of peppermint and rain-soaked paper. She didn't look startled to see her visitor, just tired in the dignified way people are when they have already decided what not to say. "I came to talk about what happened," Alyssa said, careful, respectful. "You shouldn't have to handle this alone. We can press charges, civil rights violations, misconduct, even assault under color of authority." Naomi poured tea into 2 cups, though she only handed over 1. "Justice doesn't need anger right now," she said gently. "It needs patience." Alyssa frowned. "With respect, Judge, patience won't hold those officers accountable." Naomi's smile was soft, almost maternal. "Patience is what makes accountability possible, Ms. Grant. If I react like them, I become them." Her voice was calm, but underneath it, there was something that could shake mountains if it ever chose to rise. Alyssa hesitated, the argument dying before it reached her lips. She'd met many people in her career, victims, liars, politicians, but never someone who could turn restraint into power so effortlessly. She nodded slowly. "You're not pressing charges, then?" Naomi shook her head. "Not yet. Let the truth breathe first." The truth. As Alyssa left the apartment, she paused in the hallway, heart caught somewhere between frustration and awe. Through the slightly open door, she caught a glimpse of Naomi's study books, stacked high notes scattered across the desk, and a half-open folder labeled Security Protocol Review, Ethics Committee. Alyssa stepped away quietly. The judge wasn't avoiding justice. She was building something bigger than vengeance. That evening, Alyssa sat back at her desk under the dim yellow light of the Internal Affairs office. The file in front of her was open. She'd watched the video again, slower this time. Every second looked different now. The woman they'd called trespasser was a sitting judge. The officers who'd thrown her to the ground had, without knowing it, assaulted the very embodiment of the justice system they swore to protect. She opened a new document, fingers hovering over the keyboard, for a long moment before typing, "Subject confirmed, Judge Naomi Ellis. Incident under judicial review." She sat back, the realization settling over her like a slow dawn. The outrage that had filled her yesterday was shifting into something else: curiosity, maybe even reverence. Because if Judge Naomi Ellis was as calm as she'd seemed, it meant she wasn't done, and whatever came next wasn't going to be quiet. The internal hearing room was small, windowless, and much too quiet for the number of people inside. The kind of room where even a chair creak sounded like a confession. Officer Ryan Hale sat at the long oak table, his uniform freshly pressed, but his hands restless in his lap. Across from him, Alyssa Grant adjusted her files with the calm precision of someone who'd come to dismantle a man's certainty, piece by piece. A low hum from the ceiling vent filled the space. Then Alyssa broke it. "Officer Hale," she began, her tone. "Even did you verify the woman's identification before you put your hands on her?" Ryan straightened, forcing authority into his voice. "She didn't show any." Alyssa didn't blink. "Did you ask for it?" The silence that followed wasn't long, but it felt like the room leaned in to hear it stretch. Ryan's jaw tightened. He looked toward the tabletop, where his reflection swam faintly in the polished wood. "No," he said finally. Alyssa nodded once, as if she'd expected the answer. "So you didn't confirm her identity, and yet you decided she didn't belong?" "I followed the rules," he shot back, louder than necessary. "Restricted access means restricted. No credentials, no entry. That's standard procedure." She tilted her head slightly. "Do you often stop people based on how they look?" His breath hitched. "I stop people based on behavior." "Behavior," she echoed, flipping through her notes. "According to your statement, she was walking quietly toward the gate carrying a briefcase. What about that behavior raised alarm?" Ryan opened his mouth, then closed it again. His lawyer shifted beside him, but said nothing. Alyssa lifted a printed sheet from the folder and read aloud, her voice steady. "You people always think the rules don't apply to you." The words hung in the air like smoke. Ryan's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard. "Those are your words, correct?" Alyssa asked. He hesitated, eyes flicking toward his attorney. Then, barely audible, "Yes." "Do you understand why that phrase is concerning Officer Hale?" He gripped his knees under the table. "I was frustrated. She wouldn't comply. It wasn't about race." Alyssa leaned forward. "But the phrase, 'you people,' it wasn't directed at her job title. It wasn't about procedure. It was about what you saw." Ryan's lawyer, Mark Holloway, raised a hand. "Objection. Counsel is editorializing." Alyssa smiled faintly. "This isn't a courtroom counselor. This is internal review. We're here to establish facts, not protect feelings." Mark dropped his hand, muttering, "Then stick to facts." She did. Fact, you did not verify her ID. Fact, you assumed she was trespassing. Fact, you used physical contact to remove her from property she may have had a right to access. And fact, she tapped the paper you made a racially charged statement in the process. "Are those facts incorrect?" Ryan exhaled through his nose. "They're incomplete." "Then complete them for me." He shifted in his seat, staring straight ahead. The woman was defensive. She refused to answer questions clearly. "In my experience, that's non-compliance. Non-compliance creates security risk." Alyssa let the words sit for a moment before responding. "Your experience." She glanced down at her notes. 15 years in courthouse security. How many of those incidents involve black women in business attire?" Ryan froze. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Just a question." His lawyer jumped in again. "You're trying to turn this into a witch hunt." "No," Alyssa said softly. "I'm trying to understand why a decorated officer mistook a professional woman for a threat on courthouse property in broad daylight." The tension in the room pulsed like heat. Ryan's fingers tapped against his knee. "I made a call. That's what we're trained to do." "Trained to judge?" Alyssa asked quietly. His head snapped up. Trained to keep order, she leaned back slightly. And tell me, Officer Hale, what kind of order drags a woman across concrete without even asking her name? He didn't answer. From the back row, a soft rustle broke the stillness. Judge Naomi Ellis sat there, her posture immaculate, her face unreadable. She wore no robe now, just a simple navy suit. Most in the room didn't yet know who she was, not officially, but something about her presence commanded quiet. Even those who did know said nothing. All eyes drifted toward her anyway, like a tide that couldn't help itself. She sat motionless, hands folded in her lap, watching, not glaring, not judging, just watching. Ryan's gaze flicked toward her, and for a moment recognition flickered in his eyes, though he couldn't place her. Something about her calmness pricked at the back of his memory. He looked away quickly, heart beating faster than he wanted to admit. Alyssa noticed. "Officer Hale," she said, voice steady. "Is something distracting you?" He shook his head. "No, ma'am," but he couldn't stop glancing over his shoulder. The woman in the back, the one everyone else seemed afraid to disturb, wasn't a stranger. He could feel that. Somewhere in the fog of that morning, in the blur of his own shouting, her eyes had met his. And now, sitting under the fluorescent lights with every question peeling another layer off his defense, that memory started to cut through the armor he'd built around himself. Alyssa closed her folder. No further questions at this time. The chair of the review board, an older man with thinning hair, cleared his throat. "Officer Hale, you'll remain available for additional testimony pending review. This hearing is adjourned for now." The shuffle of papers and murmurs filled the air. Ryan stood slowly. He risked one more glance at the back row. The woman was still there, serene, silent, immovable. And for the first time, he felt something he hadn't felt since this began. Not anger, not defiance. Recognition. He didn't yet know from where, but something told him that whatever came next, she wasn't finished with him. The kind of silence that follows truth had settled in the room, and everyone could feel it. When Judge Naomi Ellis took the stand, the room went still. The scrape of her chair against the floor sounded louder than it should have, and every camera in the room tilted toward her in unison. She didn't seem to notice, or maybe she simply didn't care. Her calm had a gravity that pulled every breath closer to silence. The light from the high window caught the edge of her face, composed, unflinching. She rested both hands on the witness rail, her back perfectly straight. There was no tremor in her voice when she said, "He never asked my name. He just saw what he wanted to see." Alyssa Grant, seated across the room, lifted her pen. Her tone was respectful, almost gentle. "Judge Ellis, can you describe what you mean by that?" Naomi's eyes didn't leave the center of the room. "I mean that he didn't see a professional woman entering her workplace. He saw a trespasser, a problem, someone who didn't fit his idea of belonging." Her words weren't angry, they were simply true, and that truth was heavier than rage. Alyssa nodded slowly, flipping through her notes. "Did he hurt you physically?" Naomi tilted her head slightly as though she were measuring the question. Then she said softly, "Not as much as his words did." A murmur rippled through the audience. Journalists, officers, courthouse staff. Even the sound of someone clearing their throats seemed like a disruption. Ryan Hale, sitting at the defense table, didn't move. His gaze dropped to his lap. His lawyer's whispers, something about remaining composed, was just noise now. Alyssa leaned forward slightly. "Why didn't you resist, Judge Ellis?" Naomi met her eyes. "Because sometimes silence exposes more truth than shouting ever will." The sentence hung in the air like scripture. Someone in the back exhaled audibly. Naomi reached down beside her chair and lifted her leather briefcase. Its surface was still faintly scuffed from the day she'd fallen. She opened it and carefully unfolded a small white handkerchief stained with a faint brown mark of dried mud. She held it up for a moment before setting it gently on the rail. "This isn't dirt," she said. "It's memory. I keep it as proof that dignity can survive humiliation." The simplicity of her words made them even sharper. She wasn't pleading, she was teaching. Ryan's hands tightened around each other, knuckles pale. He couldn't look up. The phrase "you people" echoed in his mind like an alarm he couldn't turn off. Alyssa's expression softened, not pity but reverence. "Judge Ellis," she asked quietly, "what do you want this hearing to understand?" Naomi took a slow breath before answering. "That authority without empathy isn't protection, it's control. And when control becomes habit, justice disappears. Her gaze drifted to the review panel, to the reporters scribbling notes, to the officers lined along the back wall. Then finally to Ryan. She didn't glare. She simply looked at him long enough for him to feel seen in a way he'd spent years avoiding. "I don't hate Officer Hale," she said. "I believe he thought he was doing his job. But the day a badge stops asking questions is the day it stops serving the law." There was no applause. There didn't need to be. The silence itself felt sacred. Ryan's throat constricted. He wanted to speak, to apologize, to explain, but every sentence he could think of sounded small compared to her calm. The words "I didn't know" weren't enough anymore. In the front row, Captain Doyle, his commanding officer, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. His eyes darted toward the floor when Alyssa's gaze flicked his way. He knew she'd seen the hesitation, the quiet complicity that ran deeper than any single officer. Naomi placed the handkerchief back into her briefcase, closing the clasp with care. "I don't carry resentment," she said. "I carry responsibility. For myself and for those who still believe the system can heal itself if we dare to look honestly at what's broken." The air was thick with something unspoken: respect, sorrow, maybe both. The board chair cleared his throat but couldn't immediately find the right words to continue. Alyssa stayed silent too. Anything she said would have lessened the moment. Naomi glanced at the audience one last time. Her expression was calm, but her eyes held the kind of strength that only comes from surviving humiliation without surrendering humanity. Then she stood. No outburst. No dramatic exit. Just quiet grace. The kind that forces everyone else in the room to see themselves more clearly than they want to. And as she walked past Ryan's table, he looked up just once. Their eyes met. For a second, it felt like the noise of the world had vanished, and all that remained was that look, steady, unflinching, not vengeful, but devastatingly human. That was the moment Ryan Hale understood something he'd never been trained to recognize. Sometimes justice doesn't roar. It simply stands. The next morning, the hearing room was packed, reporters shoulder to shoulder, the low hum of cameras waiting for something worth recording. But this time it wasn't about emotion. It was about evidence. Cold, undeniable, and on full display. Alyssa Grant stood beside the projector screen, remote in hand. "Let's begin," she said. Her tone wasn't sharp, it was surgical. The lights dimmed. The first clip rolled. On the grainy courthouse security feed, a young white man in a gray suit walked briskly toward the south gate. The officer on duty glanced up, nodded, and waved him through. No questions, no ID check, nothing. Then the second clip appeared. A black woman mid-30s holding a badge folder approached the same gate minutes later. Ryan Hale was in the frame. He stopped her, questioned her, gestured for her to step aside. She complied, patient but visibly confused. It took over 2 minutes before she was allowed to enter. A murmur rippled through the room. The next clip showed another day. A white contractor carrying tools. Hale barely looked up, but a black security consultant who arrived just after him was detained for 15 minutes while paperwork was verified. Alyssa let the silence stretch before saying quietly, "These are all from the same week." Ryan's shoulders stiffened. He looked at the table, not the screen. She clicked again. The final clip appeared the day of Naomi's incident, the moment everyone had seen already. But this time the playback didn't stop at the scuffle. It kept rolling, showing another officer letting 3 maintenance workers, white, enter through the same gate 10 minutes later. No ID. No fuss, Alyssa turned to the board. "You can call this bias. You can call it negligence. I call it pattern." The screen went dark. She picked up a folder, flipped it open, and pressed a button on a small recorder. The playback crackled to life, voices in a locker room, the casual murmur of routine banter. "Man, they make it so easy," Ryan's voice said, half laughing. "What do you mean?" another voice asked Captain Doyle's. "We just keep the wrong kind out." The line landed like a punch. Doyle flinched. His face tightened, but he said nothing. The board members shifted uncomfortably. One cleared his throat. Another looked down at his notes as if the paper might offer an escape. Alyssa looked directly at Doyle. "Captain, do you recognize that recording?" He hesitated. "I might have said something similar, but context, Alyssa cut in. Was the context about security or about color?" Doyle exhaled through his nose, avoiding her eyes. "It was a bad joke." "Bad joke," she said softly. tend to sound a lot like the truth when they repeat themselves. Her voice stayed calm, but each word carried weight. Captain Doyle, how many black women have been promoted in your unit over the last 5 years? The room went still. He opened his mouth and stopped. His eyes darted toward the audience, then to Naomi, who sat silently in the back, hands folded again, expression unreadable. Finally, Doyle said none. The word dropped like a stone into deep water. No splash, just a sinking heaviness. Alyssa didn't need to raise her voice. So it's not just one mistake, she said. It's a system built to make that mistake over and over again. The air thickened. Even Ryan looked up now, eyes flicking between Doyle and the screen, realizing that whatever shield he thought the department gave him was crumbling. Naomi's voice broke the silence, not loud but clear. A pattern we've all chosen not to see. The tone wasn't accusatory. It was weary, like someone describing a wound that had been ignored too long. Everyone turned toward her. Reporters scribbled. The board members sat motionless. Alyssa didn't move either. Naomi continued, her voice steady. Prejudice doesn't survive in systems by accident. It survives through convenience, through silence, through the comfort of believing it's someone else's problem. Her gaze shifted across the room, first to Doyle, then Ryan, then the cameras. You cannot fix what you refuse to admit exists. The chair of the board swallowed hard, fumbling for words that wouldn't sound empty. Judge Ellis, this hearing is not about. She interrupted gently. It's always about that. For a moment, no one breathed. The sound of the old air conditioner filled the room, a dull mechanical hum, until Alyssa finally broke the silence. Let the record reflect, she said quietly, that the department's internal bias review has been reopened pending further investigation. Her words weren't dramatic, but they carried the finality of a verdict. Ryan leaned back in his chair, jaw tight, the realization dawning that this was bigger than him. He wasn't the center of the storm anymore. He was proof of it. Doyle shifted in his seat, eyes fixed on the table. His earlier confidence was gone, replaced by something closer to shame, or maybe fear. The hearing room was silent again, but it wasn't peace. It was the quiet that comes when everyone in the room finally sees what's been there all along. And as Naomi stood to leave, her voice carried softly across the space, half statement, half warning. Justice isn't blind, she said. It's just been looking in the wrong direction. No one dared to respond. When Alyssa Grant rose from her seat, the room had already grown too still. Even the ceiling fan seemed to hesitate its slow rotation, matching the weight that hung over the space. She walked toward the witness podium, her heels clicking like a metronome for what everyone sensed was coming. Ms. Ellis, she began, her voice calm but deliberate for the record. What is your current occupation? Every head turned. Even the cameras stopped panning as if the question itself had frozen time. Naomi Ellis stood slowly. The faint sound of her chair legs scraping the floor echoed like thunder. Her hands rested lightly on the railing before her, her chin lifted not in pride but in the quiet certainty of someone who'd spent a lifetime holding composure. I am, she said, her voice carrying through the chamber, the Honorable Judge Naomi Ellis, appointed to preside over this courthouse 3 weeks ago. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the silence hit like an explosion. The audience gasped, sharp, collective, like the air had been punched out of the room. The board members looked at each other in disbelief. A journalist dropped her pen. Even the cameras seemed to refocus automatically, scrambling to capture every inch of her face. At the defense table, Officer Ryan Hale sat frozen, his mouth parted slightly, his knuckles pale around the edge of the table. Across the room, Captain Doyle blinked hard as if hoping he'd misheard her. He hadn't. The clerk near the corner fumbled through some papers, mumbling, "Wait, Judge Ellis." He stopped, then looked up, voice trembling as he read from a schedule sheet. She was scheduled to preside at 9:00 a.m. the same morning of the incident. All eyes shot back to Ryan. The color drained from his face. I didn't know, he stammered, his voice cracking somewhere between disbelief and shame. Naomi's gaze met his, steady as stone. You didn't ask. The words landed heavier than any accusation. For a long second, no one dared breathe. Alyssa didn't say a word. She didn't need to. The truth had already done her job for her. Ryan's lawyer, Mark Holloway, looked like a man sinking in slow motion. He ran a hand over his face, but there was no defense left to make. Doyle's head hung low, beads of sweat forming at his temple. In the back of the room, a court reporter's typing slowed the rhythm, faltering. The story they were all part of had just turned into a scandal that would travel far beyond these walls. Outside in the courthouse hallway, a young journalist pressed her phone to her ear. "You're not going to believe this," she whispered, walking quickly toward the exit. "She's the new judge. They dragged a judge, yes, Naomi Ellis, appointed 3 weeks ago. This is going to explode." And it did. Within minutes, news alerts began flashing across screens. Breaking officer accused of assaulting sitting judge. Cameras swarmed the courthouse steps. The crowd outside doubled, then tripled, citizens, activists, reporters, all pressing against the barricades demanding answers. Inside, though, the room was quiet again, as if the walls themselves were trying to absorb the weight of what had just happened. Ryan still hadn't moved. The realization was hitting him in waves. Every frame of that viral video replayed in his mind, the shove, the glare, her calm voice saying, "You'll regret this. Not because of who I am, but because of what you've become." Now it made sense. All of it. Alyssa turned back toward the board. So she said softly, "The woman this department accused of trespassing was in fact the presiding judge assigned to this courthouse. The one responsible for ensuring these officers uphold the very laws they violated." No one replied. Doyle's pen slipped from his hand, clattering onto the desk. It sounded louder than a gunshot in the still air. Naomi remained standing, her face unreadable. She didn't gloat. She didn't smile. If anything, there was sorrow in her calm. "I didn't come here for revenge," she said finally. "I came for truth. Because if this could happen to me, someone within these walls, then imagine what happens to those without a title to protect them." The reporters in the corner typed frantically. The board members avoided her eyes. Ryan leaned forward, his voice barely a whisper. "I swear, I didn't know." Naomi looked at him, her expression steady, compassionate, but firm. "That's exactly the problem, Officer Hale. You didn't want to know." That sentence hit harder than any judgment could have. Mark Holloway, Ryan's lawyer, leaned close to his client, muttering, "Don't respond. Don't say another word." But Ryan barely heard him. He was staring at Naomi like a man seeing his own reflection for the first time and not liking what stared back. Alyssa turned off the microphone, signaling the board that the testimony was complete. The chair cleared his throat, but his voice trembled. "This hearing will reconvene pending judicial instruction," he said, but no one was listening. Naomi stepped down from the podium. Every camera followed her movement, the flashbulbs scattering light like lightning strikes. She paused at the exit just long enough to turn back to the board. Justice, she said quietly, wasn't meant to protect power. It was meant to protect people. Then she walked out, leaving the entire room stunned into silence. Outside, the noise hit like a wave. Reporters shouted her name, microphones thrust forward, cameras flashing in bursts of light. Naomi didn't flinch. She walked through the chaos as if it were mist, her poise unshaken, her silence more powerful than any statement could be. Inside, through the courtroom glass, Ryan sat motionless under the harsh fluorescent lights. His badge, once a symbol of pride, now gleamed like a reminder of failure. He stared blankly ahead as the crowd's roar grew louder outside, voices shouting for accountability, for justice, for truth. And as the camera zoomed in, catching the faint reflection of Naomi's departing silhouette in the window behind him, Ryan's expression collapsed somewhere between realization and ruin. That was the moment the audience gasped, the moment every viewer watching at home leaned forward, whispering to themselves, "They dragged the judge." And no one in that room or outside it would ever forget it. The next hearing came fast. No cameras this time, no applause of flashbulbs, just the dry, echoing formality of accountability. Captain Doyle sat stiffly in his uniform, the silver trim on his badge catching light that felt too harsh for the room. Beside him, Officer Ryan Hale looked smaller than before. No longer the steady guard of courthouse gates, just a man whose badge had been taken and whose certainty had vanished with it. Alyssa Grant stood at the podium, reading from a document in her steady, deliberate voice. "The Internal Affairs Division finds sufficient evidence to proceed with disciplinary and criminal review on charges of violation of civil rights misconduct and abuse of authority." The words rolled out clean and sharp, each one carving through the silence like glass. Ryan didn't lift his head. Doyle's throat moved, but no sound followed. From the back of the room, Judge Naomi Ellis sat quietly, dressed not in her robe, but in the same dark suit from that first day. She didn't watch Ryan directly. Her gaze was fixed somewhere beyond him, past the room, past the noise. When Alyssa finished, she turned to Naomi. Would you like to make a statement before sentencing recommendations are finalized? Naomi stood slowly, her composure unwavering. Her voice was low, but it filled the space with something that silenced even the hum of the fluorescent lights. Justice isn't anger, she said. It's accountability. Every word landed like a slow drumbeat. Ryan looked up at her for the first time in days. His eyes were red, his voice rough. I thought I was protecting order, he said quietly. Naomi met his gaze. No, she said, not cruelly, not even coldly, just true. You were protecting fear. The sentence hit him harder than any judgment could. For the first time, the room didn't see a defiant officer. They saw a man realizing what he'd become, what they'd all become under the comfort of old habits and quiet prejudice. Captain Doyle leaned back, weary, his voice breaking the silence. We all did, he muttered. We told ourselves it was procedure. We just didn't want to look in the mirror. Naomi nodded slightly, almost imperceptibly, as if she understood that admission was its own kind of justice. Ryan's lawyer whispered something, but Ryan didn't respond. He reached into his pocket out of habit, searching for his badge. It wasn't there. Only a faint circle of lighter fabric remained where it used to rest. Two officers approached him from behind, motioning for him to stand. He did slowly. The click of handcuffs wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, almost ceremonial. As they led him toward the door, his gaze swept across the table where it had all started. There, sitting in the same place as before, was Naomi's old leather briefcase, its edges still scratched from the fall on those courthouse steps. The overhead light reflected off its surface a dull shimmer across the worn leather. The camera crews outside weren't allowed in today, but if they had been, they would have seen the same image that began this entire story. One woman's briefcase on the floor, surrounded by silence. Except this time, it wasn't a symbol of humiliation. It was one of endurance. Alyssa gathered her papers as the board adjourned. Her expression wasn't triumphant, it was heavy, thoughtful. She knew justice never felt like victory. It always felt like consequence. Naomi remained seated until the last voice left the room. She looked down at the briefcase, running her fingers along the scratches, as if tracing the memory that started it all. Then she whispered, almost to herself, "We build justice the same way we rebuild faith, slowly, painfully, but never in vain." Outside, the sun cut through the courthouse glass, spilling light across the corridor floor. Reporters waited, cameras flashing the city, buzzing with news of the fallen officers. But Naomi didn't stop to speak. She walked through the noise with the same calm grace she'd shown since the beginning. Alyssa caught up to her near the steps. "Judge Ellis," she said softly, "was it worth it?" Going through all this, Naomi paused, her eyes thoughtful. "If it teaches even one person that power means responsibility, not privilege," she said, "then yes, it was worth it." And then she stepped down the marble stairs, the same stairs where she'd once been shoved to the ground. Only this time, every step sounded like restoration. Behind her, the door to the hearing room creaked open one last time. The faint sound of Ryan's chains echoed in the distance, fading beneath the hum of traffic outside. The light from the courtroom window shifted, landing once more on the old leather briefcase resting on the table, its worn surface glinting softly like the final reflection of a truth the world could no longer ignore. And with that, the circle closed. What began in humiliation ended in reckoning. Justice finally had stood up. 6 months had passed since the courthouse scandal. The world had moved on, at least on the surface. But for Ryan Hale, time hadn't moved forward. It had slowed, softened, reshaped him in quiet ways. He now worked nights as a security guard at a small hardware store on the corner of Jefferson and 8th. No badge, no uniform stripes. Just a plain blue shirt with security stitched above the pocket. The pay was small, but the peace was something he hadn't known before. Each evening as the doors opened, he greeted everyone the same way. "Good evening, sir." "Good evening, ma'am." And each time he meant it. Sometimes people ignored him. Sometimes they smiled back. And every time they did, a strange calm washed over him, the kind that comes only after you've been humbled enough to listen. One night, as rain tapped softly on the shop's windows, the old television behind the counter flickered to life. The news anchor's voice filled the small, dimly lit space. "Today marks the nationwide adoption of the Ellis Protocol, a new federal standard for courthouse conduct and civil accountability inspired by Judge Naomi Ellis's landmark case 6 months ago. Ryan froze mid-step. He turned toward the screen. The broadcast cut to a live clip Judge Naomi Ellis standing before a congressional committee, the same poise she had that day in the hearing room. Cameras flashed around her, but she didn't blink. Her voice came steady, clear, and resolute. Justice isn't revenge. It's remembering who we are when power blinds us. The room around Ryan seemed to fade away. For a moment it was just her voice, soft, yet unyielding, echoing through the air, like a truth that refused to grow old. He stood there still, as stone eyes, glassy, with something he hadn't felt in years. Peace, maybe, or gratitude. The broadcast continued, showing her shaking hands with senators, speaking with young interns, smiling politely at the applause she clearly didn't seek. Ryan noticed how unchanged she looked, not triumphant, not bitter, just grounded. He turned off the TV after a while, but her words lingered in the silence. He sat down in the break room, where the smell of instant coffee and old paint filled the air. His reflection in the vending machine glass looked older, calmer. He'd lost weight. His hair had gone slightly grayer at the temples. But there was something new in his face too, an ease that came from no longer fighting the truth. The door behind him opened with a gentle creak. An older black woman walked in, wrapped in a long brown coat, her hands carrying a small shopping bag. Her eyes were kind, but observant, the way people's eyes get when they have lived through too much to judge anyone too quickly. "Good evening, officer," she said softly, the word kind but deliberate. For a brief second, Ryan froze. Then he smiled faintly and lowered his head, not in shame this time, but in respect. "Good evening, ma'am," he replied. She smiled back and walked past, leaving the faint scent of lavender and rain in the air. Ryan watched her go, then looked out the window where neon lights shimmered off wet pavement. The city felt quieter tonight, the kind of quiet that doesn't demand silence, but invites reflection. He sat there for a long time, the glow of the sign outside painting his face in shades of blue and red. The same hands that once gripped authority too tightly now rested open on his knees. He wasn't the same man who dragged Naomi Ellis across the courthouse steps. That man had lived in fear, fear of losing control, fear of being wrong, fear of being seen. The man in this chair had learned something different. That order without understanding isn't justice. It's just noise dressed in uniform. He leaned back, letting out a long, unsteady breath. Somewhere deep inside, the tension that had lived in his chest for years finally loosened. Outside, the rain stopped. The neon light flickered once, then steadied, reflecting across the glass door like a quiet halo. Ryan smiled, a small, weary smile, but a real one. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like he was guarding anyone. He felt like he was finally part of the world again. And as the night deepened, the city lights painted his face with soft color, remorse, peace, and something close to redemption. No grand music, no applause. Just a man learning quietly how to begin again. The years that followed turned the courthouse incident into more than just a headline. It became a lesson. A quiet montage unfolded across America, young law students reciting from case files, rookie officers watching training videos, and courthouse staff taking part in workshops titled The Ellis Protocol. In classrooms and briefing rooms, Naomi Ellis's calm face appeared on screens, her words shaping a new standard of respect and accountability. In one interview filmed for a national broadcast, she sat under soft studio lights, no robe, no title on the screen, just her name. The host asked what her legacy meant to her. Naomi smiled faintly, her tone gentle but steady. "Dignity isn't something we earn," she said. "It's something we owe to one another." That line spread everywhere, printed in textbooks, quoted in police academies, etched into courthouse walls. But for those who had followed her story from the start, it wasn't just a quote. It was a reminder that the smallest acts of respect could restore something larger than justice. They could restore humanity. As her voice faded, a narrator's tone, calm, reflective, and deep, the kind of warmth you hear in old stories, told around a table, filled the air. Sometimes justice doesn't wear a robe. Sometimes it stands quietly, waiting for the world to see. The screen transitioned to a museum exhibit, a single spotlight illuminating a glass case. Inside, resting carefully on a velvet cloth, sat the worn leather briefcase, the same one that had fallen on the courthouse steps. Its scratches were still visible, untouched, a testament to what it had witnessed. Beneath it, a small bronze plaque read, "Carried by Judge Naomi Ellis, symbol of dignity under fire." The piano began softly slow emotional notes that carried both weight and peace. The camera lingered for a moment, capturing the reflection of the case's glass surface, one that mirrored both the past and the progress born from it. The narrator's voice returned one final time, sincere and grounded. "We tell stories like this because truth deserves to be remembered, and because every act of courage, no matter how quiet, lights the path for those who follow." Then the music swelled just slightly, the kind that leaves the heart full rather than heavy. On-screen text appeared simple and honest. "If this story moved you, hit like, share, and subscribe to Mr. Max Stories. Your support keeps these stories of justice alive." The piano faded. The image of the briefcase remained for a few seconds longer, glowing softly beneath the light, a silent symbol of how dignity, once tested, became the very thing that rebuilt faith in justice. And then slowly the screen dissolved into black, leaving only the echo of her words. Dignity isn't something we earn. It's something we owe to one another. At the end of the day, this story reminds us that justice isn't only found inside a courtroom, it lives in the way we treat each other with respect, empathy, and courage. Judge Naomi Ellis's strength showed that true power doesn't come from authority, but from dignity under fire. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who still believes in fairness, and subscribe to Mr. Max Stories for more powerful tales about truth, justice, and the human spirit. Your support means the world to us. It's what keeps the Mr. Max Stories team creating more heartfelt stories that speak to the soul. Because here, every story carries one promise: justice remembered, dignity restored.